Warm greetings. On behalf of Wednesdays for Water, an initiative of the W4W Foundation, a think tank instituted as Citizens Collective, we welcome you to the session number 101 of on urban rivers integrated water resource management. The objective of Wednesdays for Water is to engage in conversation with water experts, grassroots practitioners, policymakers, and youth to explore the complex intertwined issues associated with water and the possible solutions. We have expanded since then to have more activities like the Friday Waters and the Monday Munching with Women for Water, besides organizing water workshops, water lectures, water walks and talks, special courses, and conference panels to continue the water conversation in various possible ways, as we strongly believe that water conversations are crucial for water conservation. Do visit our website www.w4w.in for more details. Coming to today's session on urban rivers integrated water resource management, we all are aware that there are rivers in almost every city and town of the country, in fact, all habitats around the world, and they are facing existential threat with the current regulations, planning, and weak implementation and enforcement to protect their integrity. They can be in various stages of, I must say, extinction. Efforts to revive them over the last few decades are challenged with several aspects, and one of them, which has been often challenged by scholars, is a top-down technical approach to deal with the rivers. We have come to this realization that rivers are part of larger ecosystem, and besides the technical lens, they need to be reviewed as cultural, spiritual, economic, and social systems. With this kind of understanding, the integrated water resource management was first initiated by the Tennessee Valley Authority in 1933, and later in 1957, a UN report on integrated river basin development stated that water infrastructure by itself does not bring development, and therefore supporting services are needed. And we all are aware also about the ecosystem services which came out of the water literature. The integrated resource management is a process that promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources in order to maximize economic and social welfare in an equitable manner without compromising the sustainability of vital ecosystems. This definition comes out from the UN, and this was quite prominent with the Dublin Principles in 1992, and thereafter it has been used extensively around the world. But let me just invite now our speakers to talk more about it and the state of our rivers, and are we using the integrated water resource management, how and why are our rivers in that manner. To do the discussion today, we have Dr. Shinde, Professor Saswat Badhopadhyay, and a young discussant, Moksha Mehta. Let me provide a brief intro of our first speaker, Victor, and then invite him to pitch his thoughts on the subject. Victor heads the Climate Center for Cities at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, which is abbreviated as NIUA. His work over the last 17 years spans across diverse domains such as urban rivers management, urban environmental and planning, integrated water resource management, water security assessment, climate change adaptation in water sector, flood risk management, and so on and so forth. He leads the development of several national level frameworks, tools, and advisories for urban river and water management in Indian cities at NIUA. His bio is honestly quite long, of course, with so many years of experience. I'm going to put his biography in the chat box, and let me not take more time in reading it, and let me invite Victor to give his first speech. And once his speech is over, I'm going to introduce the second speaker for the session. Over to you, Victor. Thank you so much for taking out time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mansee, for this for the invitation and for the introduction. So I have been actually following Wednesdays for Water through LinkedIn. It always comes into my feed, and I'm so glad that I'm part of it this time. It's such a pleasure and such an honor to be associated with the the Wednesdays for Water, right? And it's also a great honor for me to be alongside Professor Saswat, with whom we've had a very long relationship in the past, and I'm sure it will go in the future as well. A number of ideas and common things that we share. So it's always wonderful to be, for me to be with him on the panel. Right? So the topic for today's discussion, which is on urban rivers, is something that I have been working since 2014, right? And I just want to start with a very interesting anecdote, which I'm sure would be, would bring a very interesting perspective out of. This was in 2014 when I was at the Asian Institute of Technology, so I used to work there, and the government of Thailand, they approached us, asking us for some help in devising some river health monitoring systems for the country. So my professor at that time, Professor Mukund Babel, he's a well-known character, when it comes to ecological restoration and the efforts taken in those directions. So we embarked on this project, and one of the deliverables of the project was to set up a community-based monitoring system. Because I think the thought process at that time was that while the government has a role to play, there is no question about it. It's also important for communities to be engaged in the process so that you have this long-term sustainable management of the river in so many ways. So the site that we had chosen for our research and our preliminary work was in the northeast of Thailand, right? So which is just bordering Cambodia on the other side. And that's called the Songkhram catchment, or the Songkhram River, which actually flows through there. And it's a relatively pristine river, right? So there's not too much anthropogenic influence or disturbance in that area. And the research point went very well, and we were able to achieve almost all the objectives that we had envisaged. But when it came to establishing this community-based river health monitoring system, surprisingly, it was not that easy. And the reason was because the communities were hardly even interested. The river is pristine. They thought, okay, this is going to be here for a while. Why should we even monitor it, right? So it took us a lot of effort, a lot of convincing to kind of bring them on board. Even then, the results were not very satisfactory. We just got superficial participation. Nobody was really invested in the project. And that's when we decided, let's move to another basin. So in the same gamut of things, we said, let's try it out in the Thachin River Basin, which is a little towards the south, very close to Bangkok. And here the river is severely polluted. And the response that we got here was starkly different. It's a complete contrast. Communities were very much interested in being part of this initiative. They were very much invested. They wanted to take efforts to revive the river, and whatever little that they could do. So that actually brought in a very interesting observation that, very often it is a crisis that actually leads to action. Right? When things are going okay, when things are going normal, there is hardly any movement. There's hardly any momentum that can be got, right? But crisis can actually lead to transformation. Right? And this has been proved so many times, right? If we look at the Australian example, Australia today are leaders when it comes to water management, but that was not the case in the 90s or the 80s, right? It's the millennium drought that was there for almost 10 years that made them to reimagine the way they manage their water. And now here we have Australia now, in a different state, right? Likewise, Singapore, for a very long time, they were dependent upon Malaysia for their water. But once they realized that, that dependence is perhaps not in their best interest, that's when they started to, again, re-examine how they looked at water. And that's where you have new water and, things of those sort. Ditto for Los Angeles, right? Okay. So the point I'm trying to make is, it's the crisis, that leads to transformation, as I said. And India, at the moment, so we have no dearth of crisis. So, you look at almost any city, there is some or the other crisis. Perhaps in some regions it is less, but pretty much, there is that need, to bring about some drastic way in which we improve our equation with the rivers. Right? And the good thing is the cities are realizing that, because cities invariably are the greatest contributors to the dilapidated state of rivers. and more and more they're beginning to realize that that equation needs to be mended. So it's actually that transformation. So we are sitting at a cusp of something very interesting, and some big ticket transformative action that is going to happen in India over the next 5 to 7 years is what I can actually imagine. Right? This is coming also from the Prime Minister. It helps that it comes from the Prime Minister because he has a deep passion for the rivers and the support that he provides institutes and agents and individuals working on this regard. So it's actually on those lines that NIUA, my organization, we have been involved in a couple of these transformative actions, and I want to very quickly highlight these two because, okay, I see a message saying that there is no sound.
Yeah, but we hear you. So Deepak, Deepak, maybe you have to check at your end. So we are hearing you. Live is also active in sound. So
Okay.
please continue.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry, Deepak, you have to handle at your end. Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, like I said, I just want to highlight two such, transformative actions that India is taking, at the moment, which I think is going to be, which is going to go a long way in defining our trajectory, when it comes to river management. The first is something called as integrated urban river management, which is under the principles of integrated water resources management. Now, here, the premise was for a very long time, when it came to river management, the sole focus in the cities was on controlling pollution. So it is almost synonymous with pollution control. But then river management is way more than pollution control. It's about looking at the social aspects, the economic aspects. In other words, looking at the river as a system of interconnected elements and understanding the interactions between these elements. So it is on those lines that NIUA and the National Mission for Clean Ganga, who are our very strong partners, in this journey. We came up with a framework called as an Urban River Management Plan framework. The purpose of this framework was to introduce this new thinking in Indian cities. That let's not only look at pollution control, but let's also look at these other aspects, which are equally important, if not more. And this was new thinking. This is new paradigm. Okay, so cities, while they acknowledged the importance of this, they understood that it is important. There was little capacity for them to actually adopt these practices. And that is when we came up with this second transformative action, which is to establish a River Cities Alliance in India. The entire purpose of this alliance, or the purpose of establishing this alliance, was to provide the cities with a platform where they can discuss these new thinking. They can learn from each other, as they progress, in their path towards river-sensitive development. And there are so many things that happen. It was more of a knowledge exchange platform. It also gave NIUA and NMCG an opportunity, to provide some niche capacity building in areas that were until now, relatively unexplored in some ways. So that River Cities Alliance, it was launched in the year 2021, and it was we started off with 30 members. Okay, a humble figure, but then we wanted to start with small, just to see how things go along, right? The unique thing about this alliance is it's not mandatory for any city to join. It's completely up to them. If they see a value in the alliance, they come, they join us, and then of course they get the benefits that that come out of it, right? So within a period of 1 year, this number shot from 30 to 119. So today we are at 119 cities, and almost every week there are new cities that are wanting to join the alliance. For me, it is a very very encouraging moment because, like I said, this is not mandatory. Nobody's forcing their cities to join, but it's great that they see value, right? And more importantly, it's great that they want to mend that relationship with the rivers. So I was in Kolkata for the last 2 days, and we were doing, and there were around 29 ULBs from Kolkata, from West Bengal. And it was so encouraging to see the enthusiasm that they had for repairing that equation with the rivers. The interventions that we discussed, the technical aspects that we discussed with these 29 ULBs, including very senior IS officers as well. So this, like I said, so we are at the cusp of something very transformative, and it is now for us to sustain this momentum and introduce something to the world and position India globally. Right, River Cities Alliance is actually a first of its kind alliance in the world. While you have maybe to some extent similar in the US, there's the Mississippi River Cities Towns Initiative, but that is only along the Mississippi. Right, it's a smaller kind of a thing. In Japan, you have one, but the alliance that actually connects the entire country together. So there are 78 rivers that currently today are being covered under this alliance. Right? So that is a kind of a first. Right? And here is a very real opportunity for us to position India globally. And there are a lot of wonderful things that we are doing here now in India as well. So which we think is should be showcased and should be projected to the world ahead. Right? So, finally, in conclusion, I just want to say that, you see, in the title or in the theme, the theme of this kind of workshop today, or this talk today, is on integrated water resource management. And like Mansee pointed out, this has been around for a while. It's not a new concept, but somehow very few countries are able to master this. Right? There's hardly any country that has had, who can claim, a very high degree of success in this. The closest that comes to my mind is Indonesia. Okay, they have river basin organizations for almost all the basins that they have proper, with empowered RBOs. Thailand comes a little closer as well. They have 25 basins. Each basin has an RBO. All right, but that is much, right? So they don't have too many regulatory powers. And one of the key challenges of IWRM, and this has been documented thoroughly in literature, is that, while it is a great idea to talk about coordination, it's a great idea to talk about that integration of different aspects, it's very difficult to implement, given the administrative boundaries don't really match the hydrological boundary. So with this urban river management plan, that I just talked about, right? Here is a very real chance of operationalizing IWRM, or integrated water resource management, because every single city is following the same agenda. As per the urban river management plan framework, every city needs to follow a 10-point agenda. So they need to take actions against 10 points. 6 of them are under the environmental category, 2 under the social, and 2 under the economic, looking at the triple bottom line. Now, if every city does that sincerely, and does that with dedication, you automatically achieve, the overall objective or overall vision of the river basin. Right? So this is actually, in so many ways, giving IWRM the teeth that it requires, and it no longer just remains a philosophy, but it is now, becoming a very tangible and a very practical thing to do. Right? So finally, I think this is a very exciting time, for rivers, for water in India. I think it's pretty unprecedented, the amount of funding that is being pumped into the water sector, the kind of reverence that is there, the kind of thrust, emphasis that has been given on the sector. We've perhaps not seen that too much in the past. So I think, as a community, it's a great time. It's a great time, and we just hope that the next 5 to 10 years will take us to the path, that we are destined for. Thank you so much, Mansee, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Victor. Thanks for putting up your pitch about the subject area, and it's interesting to learn how it started with you, and then also how NIUA is taking its strides along with the River Cities Alliance. I have put the River Cities Alliance news in the chat box for people to learn a little bit more about it, and then later you can enlighten them. So let me now invite Saswat, because we will take all the questions towards the end. So before I request him to speak, let me just briefly introduce Professor Saswat Badhopadhyay. He is the project director at Center of Urban Planning and Policy at CEPT Research and Development Foundation and is currently professor at the Faculty of Planning, CEPT University, Ahmedabad. He has over 25 years of experience in the urban development sector in South Asian region with a focus on sustainable urban development, climate and disaster risk reduction, integration of land use and infrastructure, nature-based solutions, and the management of historic cities. He has spearheaded many committees and he has written extensively. So I'm going to put his bio in the chat box to save time for our speaker to speak. And most importantly, personally for me, he's been my senior for so many years. So he's one of the person I met him first when I arrived in Ahmedabad and at CEPT University. So I'm extremely delighted to have him here and co-speak with all of us. So over to you, Saswat, and we like to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, thank you and good evening, everyone. Special thanks to Mansee because I have been receiving a lot of announcement, but Mansee is the one who extended an invitation, and it's always pleasure to discuss water with Mansee because one point of time when there was something we were doing in Veraval in a CEPT research assignment. So one of our assignment involved in water reviving of a lake near Veraval. If you remember, there was a scheme then. So thanks
Yes.
for inviting and all colleagues, and especially our young professional Moksha for curating this or also discussing. And it is always a pleasure to listen to Victor because he very passionately, engaged with water and river. And that's what, I would like to bring a little slightly different perspective and back to the question what Mansee and the team posed about integrated water resource management aspect. And I want to just share some of the experiences over the years and the challenges that we have been looking at, particularly managing water resources in the context of urban and the kind of institutional regulatory fragmentation. And I also would like to make a proposition that there is a need to bring in the lens of, linking water with the land use, linking water with an urban and regional planning processes. So, whenever we are looking at our urban areas, and all of us know about it, that most of our civilization actually grew on the banks of river. We take up most cities, but over a period of time, this civilization have turned those settlements, mostly they have turned their back to the river, and Victor is correct. In 80s and 90s, the entire aspect, the lens of looking at river was looking at pollution perspective. There are national river conservation plan, there is a river pollution. So water, rivers as a resource came much later and looking at it more integrated perspective. The second aspect of it is the river management was looked like an isolated project, mostly from the environmental and civil engineering perspective. Very little focus was given to actually engage with the people who are dealing or settling the dwellers along the users of the river. So it is like an irrigation department coming and doing some work, or environmental department doing some work of engineering nature and stuff like that. So that has happened. And the second was this has got completely disconnected with the urban land use. So whenever we are making a plan, and urban plan specifically giving more about the build spaces, open and road, and very little effort was actually put forth towards the managing the water resources. But if you look at, on the contrary, because all of us know about how, because most of the fundamental basis of urban planning is land, and the land also is the forms of catchment of the any river basin. So unless we manage the proposals we are actually like all the land use development proposal which are linked with the water, then we are actually not able to manage our river. For example, we are doing a very interesting work in the city of Bhopal, where the lake is about 36 square kilometer, and the catchment of the lake is about 300 square kilometer and spanned over 100 villages. Most of the pollution control responses, most of the engineering responses was happening in and around those 36 square kilometers. But soon it is realized that if the lake has to survive, then you have to actually look at the catchment which is spanning over 300 square kilometer and over 100 villages, and these are living villages. These are not, you cannot really wish away. People are living, cultivating, and that aspect. And this is the challenge in the water resource management. Because one, there is a clear disconnect between water resources versus urban development. And because also the way the land use growing around, and we are talking about integration, and I was just looking at two states because there was some research we were doing in the state of Punjab and state of Uttar Pradesh. You realize that urban development is a separate department, housing and planning is a separate department, and water resources is a separate department. And all of us know how these departments don't talk to each other. So whenever urban planning is being made or a regional plan is being made, so hardly any proposals of resources. So when you say integration, integrated water resource management, what we are actually talking about a much larger integration looking at water as a focus. And there, the role of a spatial planning needs to be highlighted, because spatial planning is only instrument that I see are available today or not available for in many states, where various stakeholders or stakeholding institution can able to come and coordinate around river. For example, if you take a river Gomti, the instrument, when you look at it's passing through multiple districts, multiple villages, or a river in Madhya Pradesh or river Sabarmati in Gujarat. Now you are cutting across districts and multiple stakeholding institution agencies, and we all know it becomes extremely difficult proposition to coordinate with this department unless until we create an institution. At an urban scale, the proposals like development plan, master plans have some degree, although they are still evolving and but has some degree of coordination which brings together multiple lateral institution organization to talk about subject. If the agriculture guys will talk about transportation. So if you want to really manage a river basin, we need to actually revive the culture of regional planning. And that regional planning is almost non-existent across Indian states, except for Maharashtra and probably Goa and few others. The first thing, when you are talking about river basins, we are talking about watersheds, and that's the larger. The second, when you are coming, in the urban scale, the development plan, the land use plans that we are preparing, and often you'll see the plans are talking about everything in the city and very limited little proposal or completely agnostic of the water resources. Some ornamental projects are taken up, some parks and gardens and some riverfront, which is arbitrarily. Some riverfronts are also scary. Sometimes they are actually doing more harm to the river drainage rather than actually it's done something from very urban design perspective and not really taken into the water hydrology. The third scale, which is more at a local scale, where we want to do certain recharge, we want to catch the water in our street and neighborhood, those planning scale again is non-existent. Most of the states, if you see the large states like Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, where many of the rivers, these land use planning scales are. The fourth area, which is about the regulation. So there are, when you say there are two kinds of regulation we operate in the urban area, one related to the plot, which is called building bylaws, and one related to the aspects of what we call is planning regulations. These are all DCRs, that how much built and other. And unless until we actually drill down to those regulations very cleverly, because, we suddenly say, make it water sensitive. And I saw some water sensitive urban design proposal, meaning, just covering some proposal on the surface without looking at the hydrological cycle, drainage and contour in some of the areas. So we need to understand and also do deep dive research that which of those our building regulation, which are those our planning regulation, it need to be tweaked, need to make more water friendly, water sensitive. Because you can't say the whole plan can be becoming water sensitive, because that's too much of an expectation from another instrument. But we need to see that one is planning at scale. What are you expecting at a regional plan to respond to your river management? What are you expecting our development plan and urban plan to respond to our managing the water resources? And sub-city plan, or what I call micro plan, and also, neighborhood street plan and the regulation. These are very important, element. Unfortunately, I don't see much of research is happening in India at this moment. We have to, and because as you know, this urban the land is a state subject. These are embedded, deeply embedded in each of the state regulation, and they vary substantially from one state to another state. What works in Gujarat will not work in Madhya Pradesh, and so we need to actually, if you say that, we want to, create a kind of an integrated water resources, then, we need to deep dive what are those instruments where such integration would be possible, which are those instruments where the sensitive of water, that brings. So this is what we need to look beyond the typical. See, the moment it happens, and so many of you come from traditional engineering department. If it is water, it will go to either water resources and irrigation engineering department. And if it is planning, it will go to the town planning department. Now, the time has come. We need to create a compelling story, because, as Victor rightly pointed out, that how we bring these instruments together, those, and which are those instruments which allows convergence. And that needs much, much deeper research, because presently we are very project oriented. We just say, okay, there is a pollution, or there is we want to depend on some water body, do some research project, some cases do some, but we need to see how to sustain our river basin catchment. And always, because, and there are also contradictory stakeholder, that I often give this example. Whenever we do, I mean, earlier when we were doing on the environment and other side, we become, completely as if we are custodian of that subject. And in environment, we often ignored some of the key stakeholders. Recently, I was in one seminar in Delhi where everybody in the hill was saying the hoteliers are the culprit. But also we must recognize in a hill town or any such state, these are the people who are the main driver. Unless until we bring them together, similarly in the water resources context, in the urban development context, the real estate actors, the real estate developers are one of the key agents, and we must bring them on our fold. I mean, we must also work with these agencies to see how we can drive. Similarly, so the stakeholders, the civil society actors, the citizen and institution need to be brought together. And I see one of the most prominent, platform is to revive our spatial planning system. And spatial planning instrument gives us this opportunity, but we need much deeper research, more engagement with this spatial planning instrument, because spatial planning instruments are basically, dealt with the property rights. They are never prepared for managing resources per se, water or climate, etc., etc. So we need to really do some deep thinking, ask some hard question, and do this conversation like on water to actually accelerate our effort for conservation. I'll stop here and over to you, Mansee and Tim, for question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shashwat. In such a short time, you really hit the nail of the issue, from the need for regional planning to having a little bit more detail on local planning, and then also the role of spatial planning, which is yet to become our mainstream planning for cities. So let me just request, first of all the participants to put their questions and comments in the chat box so that we can take them up once our discussant has really raised her questions to our speakers. So today we have Moksha Mehta as our discussant, and let me just provide a brief intro of hers. And I came to know her just 2 months ago when she presented her wonderful thesis on reading a riverscape, establishing socio-cultural associations between Sabarmati and its people, focused on mapping the narrative of socio-cultural influence and river ecology change in the case of Sabarmati River. She did this thesis at CEPT University, Ahmedabad, as Bachelor's of Architecture degree. She's currently a research fellow at an eco-development and research cell, and part of an all-women research expedition on tackling plastic pollution in the Ganga River, which is where we are also colleagues together. And her research interests include landscape ecology and anthropology in the Anthropocene. So wonderful to know you, Moksha, and I'm really happy to have you here because it also gives me an opportunity to see you as a professional after seeing you as a colleague and a student. Over to you. And you have to ask hard questions to both our speakers and engage them.
Thank you so much, Mansee ma'am. So first of all, thank you, Victor sir and Saswat sir for the talk. It was very interesting and illuminating. With this, I would now like to ask you, take the discussion forward with a few questions. So my first question is to you, Victor sir. With increasing urbanization, the idea of a river has also changed from being a resource that was once associated with rituals and traditions. Today, it has mostly become a commodity for utility and recreation. Are rivers water that just flow or water that is visible? So what else are there? What is your idea of a river?
Yeah, no, that's a very nice question. And I think you are doing justice to what Mansee had told you, that, ask them hard questions. So this is a good, very nice question. Huh? So see, Mansee, Moksha, right? Yes, Moksha. So the way I would put it is that I think a river means different things to different people. Right? For the fisher folk, it is a source of livelihood for them. For urban farmers, it's a source of livelihood. For pilgrims, it is a source of religious gratification. In so many ways. For some people, it could be a source of provisioning, right? So which essentially brings us to that question of what are the services that river provides humankind, right? And I think you are aware of the ecosystem services, the 4 categories: the provisioning, regulating, supporting, and the cultural services, right? And every city and every person in some way who is associated with the river, gets benefits from these 4 categories of services, right? Now, what should a river or how should a river be looked at? It has to be looked at, as an entity which is able to provide these 4 categories of services unhindered, right? Because that is its natural function. A river is meant to do that. And in order for it to thrive, in order for it to continue to provide those services, it's very vital that the inhabitants, who are on the banks of rivers or who reside in the near vicinity of the rivers also play their part. It's a bit of a symbiotic relationship, right? So you take from one hand, and of course you also give it. So I think the kind of narrative that is now being driven in the Indian cities is that there has to be a harmonious relationship between a river and a city. A city needs to acknowledge that, right, here are the services that a river can provide, which can also help the city, progress up the economic ladder, which is what they anyway strive to do. But at the same time, in order for the city, in order for the river to provide those services, there are certain set of actions, that the city needs to take. So I think once that harmonious relationship, once that is clicked, and once they're able to master that, river management becomes complete in so many ways.
Thank you, sir. So my next question is to you, Shashwat sir. So do you think this changing perception of rivers, that rivers today have become urban rivers, this has changed the idea of the whole river itself to the stretch of it? Like in the case of Sabarmati, it is only the 11-kilometer stretch of the riverfront that is stopped today or even maintained, while the rest of the 380 kilometers of the river is forgotten. How would you say could this be changed as architects, planners, and change makers?
Yeah. Thanks, Moksha. I think very interesting question. If you have seen the way the community who lived along the river banks in the villages, they have always regarded river as their, as Victor rightly mentioned, there are multiple, utility values and use values. People have either for, traditional rituals, people have also used, there are other aspects of, the water for irrigation, but traditionally the communities have responded, reflected, and also we are one of the countries in the world, which you don't realize probably, that we always have actually touched the water. If you see some of the cities in Europe and Western part, they are used for recreation and other purpose, but we actually, multiple use where water community we touch as a user. But, slowly as urbanization grew, there is a growing detachment with the water. Slowly we have turned our back, and I saw one interesting reflection by Rajesh Bhai in the chat box. They become a dump yard. If you see some of our river basin or urban river banks, actually they are become a kind of a dump yard for our waste and sanitation. And that's the concern. Because if we keep our river bank as no man's land or no person's land and we start turning it back, those areas, that inaccessibility and insanitary condition create a kind of the river bank far away, take them away from the younger community as well. And so whenever there is a detachment and water started coming in the pipeline to our houses, we don't really, get, our younger generation don't really get sensitized when the people vis-a-vis, when they touch the water, there is a kind of connection built in this. In terms of urban planning response, as I was just mentioning, that we have often in most of our whatever sketchy land use plan, we have often ignored, and also those spaces which are there. So there are some pilot intervention bringing community closer. So out of 500 kilometers of a river, even maybe 10 kilometer or 11 kilometer is taken up. But this is a welcome move, but this has to be done more sensibly. So that, you're not only bringing community, you're also making a livable space and also allowing the river to run. There is a very big, earlier in 60s and 70s in Europe, there was a movement that was concretizing the bank of the river. And slowly they realized that those bank of the embanking the river was not a good decision. And today there is a very large program in Netherlands called Making Room for the River, where actually the first thing is deconcretizing and also allowing river, as to flow, maintain its flow near the urban area. In one case, I think Mansee would know about, the town is in Netherlands, where entire town was shifted from the course of the river to allow and this is a movement, with in the fluctuating context of the climate, the rainfall, etc. So I see these are the kind of changes that needs to come, allowing river, because recognizing, like, for example, New Zealand is the country where they actually enacted that they treat the river as a living entity. And in the northern state, Uttarakhand court, I think way back into 16 or 17, they also given this status of living entities, so that there are rights to stop pollution, allow the river to free. And there's urban planner architects. We need to be, the whole breeds of them, we need to resensitize them. It's not only about ceremonial changes or sporadic changes. The entire cycle needs to be understood, and for that we need more training and retraining, more de-learning and relearning for all the planners and architects. Over to you.
The city is Nijmegen. Just to let all of you know, the city name is Nijmegen, which is
I was hesitant to pronounce. I was hesitant to pronounce that complicated name, so I'm sure because you.
I put the link also, Room for River, and the city which is actually reshaped for Room for River. So over to you, Moksha. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Very well explained. My next question was going to be about what were your thoughts on Ganga and Yamuna being declared as living entities? But I think you did answer it in this question itself. So, Victor, sir, finally keeping in mind all the discussion, I had this question for you. As discussed previously, people used water for their daily chores and other rituals too. But in cities today, there is almost no reason for a person to go to the river. And so there seems to be a disconnect between people and the river. How can this be improved in today's scenario? How can this connection, what can today's generation do to improve this connection with the rivers?
Yeah, thank you, Moksha. I think a very pertinent and a very relevant question as well, because now in the contemporary way of managing rivers, reconnecting the citizens back to the river is a very primary focus, right? So while all the engineering interventions, and I'm not undermining them, I think they are also very important. And while all those are there, a parallel track in terms of how to reconnect, citizens back to rivers, is going to be really, really crucial. Right? And for this, I think it's important to create a value for the river, right? Because if there is something that does not have a value, it is very obvious, that there would not be that connect. The connect is going to be quite limited. Right? Now, for a very long time, when I was working in India, I came here in 2018, and I used to always think that the spiritual value that a river has, right? It can automatically connect cities, or that is the best way to increase the value of river, is to kind of leverage on that spirituality that a river has. But very soon I realized, or I have been beginning to realize, that the spiritual value of a river is not a very good indicator of how well it is taken care of. Otherwise you would never see pictures of women doing the Chhat Puja, in foamy waters in the Yamuna. You see that almost every year. So these are rituals, these are things that people will do anyway, whether the water is polluted, whether it is not. Right? This is something that is that comes from the goodness of their heart, and it is something, a bit of a mandatory kind of a thing that they will need to do. In my view, I think what we need to do is we have to create a value which is an optional value, right? So people choose to go to the river, people want to go to the river. And here it is, what Saswat sir very correctly pointed out. I think planning plays a very, very vital role, in this. Right? The edge just alongside the river, which is called the riparian, in technical terms, right? We need to design the riparian in such a way, create recreational habitats, maintain it well, while at the same time, of course, there are other biodiversity benefits. But it is like a magnet, that attracts people to the rivers. Right? Riverfront development projects, again, a very planning element. Of course, we have to be a little bit careful with how we approach riverfront development in India. But nonetheless, riverfronts are actually the interface between the city and rivers. Right? So they are the way, that is that place where the interaction with the river actually happens. Right? Again, like Shaswat sir pointed out a little earlier, India is perhaps one of the few countries where you actually go and touch the water, right? And riverfront projects actually allow you to do that. So the whole idea is, to create a value, create a recreational value for the river, which will bring citizens, closer to the river, and perhaps also enhance it. And I'm being a little careful here, is also to increase the economic value. Because see, at the end of it, economy is a driver, that actually can move things very, very quickly, right? The only caveat and the only thing that we have to be mindful about is the economic activities. They do not disturb the threshold of disturbance that a river can handle naturally. So every river can handle some threshold of disturbance. It's a natural state, right? But the trick, is to be beyond or to be below that threshold and promulgate and encourage river-friendly economic activities, which again, creates that value, and you kind of have people coming back, to the river, right? So all in all, I think it is the onus is unfortunately not on the citizens here, right? The onus is a little bit on the government. It's a bit on the administrators, to create a conducive environment. Right? Because citizens they have hundreds of other features to go to, right? And there are so many options, especially in this digital age. There are so many avenues that people could do that. Okay, but providing them, creating that environment, creating that enabling environment, like I said, and setting the stage so that people can come, and enjoy the natural beauty on an optional basis, right? Not the mandatory one. So I think that is perhaps the way, we kind of need to approach the river cities and connect. And there are great examples in this, right? And I've been working in, several cities. Aurangabad is a fantastic example. Now it is called Sambhajinagar. But they've done fantastic work with their river Kham. So it's one river that flows through it. It incidentally is a seasonal river, which it only flows, I think, 3 or 4 months in a year. But the way they have beautified it with the riparian, very eco-friendly construction, it has now become a nice avenue for the people of Aurangabad to come there, and have some recreational avenues, So the onus, like I said, now is a little bit on the state, is a little bit on the authorities, to create that environment so people can be reconnected to the river.
Thank you so much, Victor sir and Saswat sir. It was a very interesting discussion. I hand it over to Mansee ma'am now.
Thank you, Moksha. Thank you so much for taking the conversation further. I have plenty of questions to ask both the guys, but let me just hold on to my questions and invite our participants to ask their questions first. So may I request Tanya Vyas to unmute herself, or maybe both the speakers can read the question. I would prefer actually Tanya to speak up and probably express it a little bit more. But her question is there in the chat box. So Tanya, who would you like to be asked? Tanya.
Whichever of the speakers is willing to answer, I'd be more than happy to hear their answer. I was just small introduction. I'm a student of zoology botany, and I'm really interested in helping the rivers of Mumbai, specifically my area. But I'm not sure where to start, as because of the new rainy season, they are putting up concrete walls around the residential areas around what has now been reduced to the nalas of our city. Like the river that runs by my house specifically drains into the Malad Creek and then directly into the Arabian Sea. But from what I can see, it's a complete dead zone. It's complete just sewage and plastic at this point. So, and there are flamingo flocks like just around 50 to 100 meters down the river that runs by. So I was wondering, how do you start with such a situation? How do you go anywhere legally or scientifically to get it back to its normal, to try and restore it? Or what is an alternate option for sewage? I know it's a lot of questions, but I'm just very curious.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I think very pertinent questions, and you are living it, the challenge as well as the good side of it. So who would like to take it? Victor, would you like to go with what River Cities Alliance is doing, and maybe tell how the framework is useful here to look into?
Sure, Mansee. Okay, and Tanya, thank you for that question. I think again a very important question here. You see, I think you pointed out to a very vital fact. No? You know that Mumbai is actually lining its rivers, right? To some extent, in certain stretches, they're doing that, right? But we also have to understand, why are they doing it? See, I'm not trying to endorse, or I'm not trying to justify any kind of action here. But one of the biggest problems in Mumbai today, is the flooding situation, right? So almost every year they get hit by floods, and since you're a resident, I think you would know that better by us, right? And now by lining rivers, what happens, and this is what Los Angeles did, this is what Europe did, back maybe around 15, 20, 25 years ago. What it does, it actually reduces the coefficient of friction and increases the flow. So the flow is then very quickly carried out to the Arabian Sea in this case, right? So the idea is more of a flood control measure, so that the water is flushed out as soon as possible, into the sea, right? The problem is Mumbai is making the mistake that Los Angeles did like 30 years ago. Or a lot of European cities did that, because at that time the engineering was like that, or the engineering knowledge was more dominant, and that's when they started to line the canals, right? Now they're beginning to realize that nature-based solutions can actually provide equally, if not more potent benefits, right? And which is why what Saswat sir was saying now they're starting to deconcretize stuff, okay, because and they would introduce nature-based solutions there, which would not only help in flood control, but also look at multiple, which also provide multiple benefits. Your air gets clean, it's a great habitat for biodiversity, so on and so forth. So the mistake that sometimes in India we make is, we tend to go through the same process without learning from the mistakes of what the others have done. We kind of need to leapfrog, right? What Los Angeles has done, at that time it was okay. There was not much knowledge about it. In some weird way, we can kind of also forgive them for that. But now it is maybe not such a good decision, to go through the same process, right? So I think that is where where the problem which I see in Mumbai. Now, to answer your questions and where do you start? See, the idea is always to start with a systems approach. Now, if you want to be personally involved, in some, and I'm looking at it two ways, from an implementation point of view and from a research point of view, because since you said you're a student, right? From a research point of view, I think what you can start is, understand the system first. Have a systems understanding of where, what the river is, where the issues are. That will then actually help you to arrive at very concrete and very logical solutions going forward. From a practice point of view, unfortunately, Mumbai is not really a member of the River Cities Alliance, but Pune is, which is not so far away. So there are a lot of. We also encourage that a lot of citizens and people who are genuinely interested, in the upkeep and in the in the maintenance of rivers, they be associated with the River Cities Alliance, and then there are certain tasks that are assigned to them, which they can kind of do on an individual basis, right? So the website, I think Mansee has already put the link there. So that is one possible way, for you, to start, right? Depending upon whichever track you take. I hope that answers your question to some extent. Right?
Yeah, just to start pondering, probably. Thank you, Victor, for answering the question, and thanks, Tanya. May I invite Rajesh Kapoor to please place your question? And I think it's a good idea to get Saswat involved into this question. I see your question a little bit nice out of local area. Rajesh, would you like to unmute yourself? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I didn't have any question. I just had comments. So.
Okay. So maybe we go further, and I see Ajit sir has a small, it's not a question again, but it's a comment. So Ajit sir, would you like to add few points here? Maybe briefly, because you have 2 points here. Okay, I don't see him unmute. Ajit sir, would you like to? Yes, Tanya, I'm coming back to you. Just give me a moment. Yeah. Deepak, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Deepak B. Yeah, go ahead, Deepak.
Yeah, good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, my question is to Shashwat sir.
Yeah.
Actually, I am a research student,
Mm-hmm.
and I am my area of research is the wetlands. So wetlands which are, I mean, it's not separate with the river system. So on a regional planning consideration, what I see is that it's the effectiveness of curtailing these pollutions and this kind of issues uh, should be dealt in a, I think, in a site-specific level, in local bodies or urban local body level. So, what is your take on this, Saswat sir?
In the management of the river basin and wetland, I think we have to look at them more integrated. And when you look at the pollution, the pollution could be happen at various levels. Something in the urban context, it is more localized, but there are also a lot of transboundary, some larger thermal power plant or some other activities in the catchment. For example, in Goa, a lot of iron ore mining, and that leads to the river pollution. So why I was highlighting the need for a regional plan. So the regional plan is a very, very cursory structure plan that allows you to protect or identify areas which is important for natural resources, which is important for forest and other eco-sensitive zone. So whenever we see the wetland and wetlands, their connections, their tributaries, some of these larger thing, it cannot be managed in a small, footloose, localized intervention. So we need to see that, whenever we say, okay, now if you are managing this river, which is probably running 500 kilometers long, so what are those kind of key areas which needs to be protected? One thing which is to be protected is the all contributing tributaries, their catchment, and most of them, for example, most of the wetlands are outside the urban boundary. So, and if they are not managed, then slowly urbanization processes, they're contributing channels, they get blocked, either they get built up or they start dumping this process. So the regional planning is a tool which is, many countries use. One is, of course, for transportation and mobility perspective, connectivity perspective. The other is that how to identify those resource areas which needs to be protected. Because beyond urban boundary, there is no other tool presently available except for some guideline or pollution control regulation. Now, what happens here is the moment it is out of sight, it becomes a subject of abuse. If something happens in the urban area, you still know so much of sewage is getting dumped. But if it is happening outside, somewhere, you won't be able to even identify how much is going to. So these are the areas which can be marked, identified, and a kind of a protection plan or a monitoring plan can be done. More localized, for example, most of the urban river, we are seeing the rivers are becoming a dumping ground of sewage and solid waste. And those areas, these are require a more localized solution. For example, many cities use those intercepting sewer to tap those wastewater, which is directly coming from the local catchment. So you need multiple levels to play, because these are, when the rivers are cross boundary, cutting across several districts, you need to actually start playing different instruments. And one instrument, because the regional plan, which is basically dealing with the land use control. And land use coefficient, as all of you, those of you are researching about runoffs, the land use and land use coefficients are one of the important determinants how much water is going to flow. And idea is to keep those channels free from any such kind of, build kind of construction or violation from any other thing. So only those instruments would be able to play some role in managing our river, our wetland, and other natural resource areas. I hope I answered your question, Deepak.
Probably for the
Yes, sir.
time
Yes, sir.
being.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very
Deepak,
much.
you may get in touch with them and continue the conversation. That's the whole idea of Wednesdays for Water. If there are any pressing questions from any participants, I may take it. Otherwise, I also have one question to each of the speakers. So, Tanya, you had your hand raised. Can you please speak up and let me request you to be as precise as you can?
Yes, ma'am. So sorry for monopolizing people's time.
No,
Very quick question this
we
time.
enjoy
Uh,
participants' engagement, actually. That's the whole idea. Go ahead.
all right. So, is there a way to minimize sewage in river water via chemical treatment or just um, stopping direct sewage into rivers or minimizing it entirely?
Who would like to go for it?
Yeah. Okay.
Victor.
So yeah, maybe Tanya, I can take a shot at this. So your question is, whether the sewage in water can be minimized. Right. See, yes, of course, it can be minimized. The best way to minimize is, of course, not let it flow in the first place. Right. So which is preventing it from getting into the river. Even if it does get into the river, there are techniques. Mostly they're called bioremediation techniques. You will just plant this called phytoremediation. So if it's planted in a correct profile, they can actually help reduce, the sewage content or the BOD content, as we call it, to a significant amount, right? But then see, there are multiple, for it to succeed, there are multiple conditions that need to be satisfied, right? Fast flowing rivers में नहीं चलेगा, right? Because that whole thing doesn't work when the flow is pretty fast. Likewise, if you have sewage coming from industrial clusters, where there's a lot of lead, heavy metals, and all, right. Phytoremediation hardly ever works, right? Also, if you have very strong concentrations, and this is something that we actually found in one of the cities that we are working in, right? So the BOD is, let's say 300, 350 and above. Bioremediation techniques have their limitations, right? So you kind of need hybrid solutions. You need a little bit of a mechanized part, and then you have some nature-based solution, right? So all in all, while it is, yes, possible to clean up the sewage in rivers, but it's an arduous process, right? So the best way is to ensure that actually untreated sewer does not enter into it. So one of the things that Saswat sir was pointing out, which many cities are doing, is having this interceptor sewer drain projects, right? So before the outfall, before the sewer or before the wastewater enters the river, it is diverted, taken to a nearby sewage treatment plant, treated there, and then dumped into the river, right? So a lot of cities are doing that. Yeah, it is one solution. I'm not saying it's the best. It is one solution, and the reason I'm saying it's not the best is because the sewage or the wastewater actually flows the entire length of the city. So you're losing out on a very crucial element. Your drains are polluted throughout the city. It's only at the last point, where it is tapped, right? But at least it's a start, right? At least the rivers are being protected. Perhaps the drains are not. Okay, but those are the ways that that can be done. Tanya, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. Let me pose my question to you only first, because you very well laid out the idea that IWRM, or Integrated Water Resource Management, is based on the understanding that water resource is integral component of ecosystem as a natural resource, as well as it has social and economic components which are to be looked upon. And you also talked about River Cities Alliance, where you talked about the kind of focus which you are putting, and I was quite happy to listen to the percentage of it, where 60% weightage is given to the ecosystem and 20% to economy and 20% to social aspects of the river. So my question to you is, because IWRM is intersectoral and we know how heavy-handed the engineering part has been, or the distribution part of river water has been, how are you really trying through the River Cities Alliance, where each urban local body acts by itself, to really bring these different departments together, at least to speak to each other and share their thoughts and plans of next few years or decades, for that matter? Over to you.
Again, thank you. I think, Mansee, that's a great question, and it is something that was always at the in our heads when we started off this program, right? So now one of the ways we do this is one of the ways is primarily through capacity building. Because we do a lot of capacity building programs where we introduce these officials, and like I said, the one that we just did in Kolkata as well. The idea is to introduce them to this whole concept of integrated management, and also make it very clear that if it is not integrated, it's not going to work, right? So if you have a passion for the river, and if you want something to do, if you want to do something for the river, it will have to be integrated. Now there are two problems here, So one is, participants, they don't want to mingle around, okay, or they don't want to have coordination with the others. The other problem is, while they want to, there are no facilities to do so, or there are no provisions.
Institutional instruments are still not in place for integration.
Absolutely. And again, from what I have realized is, I think almost everybody wants to have that coordinated effort, right? It's very rare, maybe one-off people, you'll find that they don't really want to talk, right? So our challenge actually is to now, and you kind of nailed it, that, we need to create those institutional mechanisms that encourage, this cross-sectoral or, interagency coordination, right? So for now, the river management, again, it's a little bit of a top-down thing, but, we are asking the city municipal commissioner to be the chair of the working group, because at least he or she has the ability to bring people or convene, the different stakeholders together. But that is not a very sustainable model. But to begin with, yes, we can do that. But at some stage, and I really like what Melbourne does. Melbourne, by law, they are mandated that every 6 months, all the water-related agencies need to come together in a workshop, in a seminar, discuss their ideas, discuss what their projects are, so that everybody is aware of where things are, right? So something on those lines, is something that perhaps we can explore. That's
a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea to at least bring them into one room and let them discuss the elephant which is there. So that may be a good, or maybe a small nudging question to you. Are the thoughts also going in the lines of budgetary distribution in the same manner? Because when I look at projects like Sabarmati Riverfront and all, I don't see 60% has been invested in ecology and 20% in economy and 20% in social aspects of it. So I think eventually, if the budget does not trickle into this kind of framework, the focus is not going to go there. But I can understand if you don't answer this question, but
No, this is a fair question, and it's a good question as well. See, the idea is, any city that prepares an urban river management plan, according to that framework that we have developed. So there are a set number of interventions. Right? What happens is, the social, economic, the environmental, I would say the environmental interventions are relatively cheaper. When it comes to, let's say, creating a riverfront, as opposed to rejuvenating a water body, right? So it's a starkly different kind of a thing, right? So a lot of the money cities are able to secure, from existing missions, like, Amrut mission that we have, any water body rejuvenation, drain rejuvenation can be covered under that. There's some that can be covered under Swachh Bharat mission. There's some that is smart cities mission. So it's only these standalone ones, and these are typically the larger infrastructural ones. That is usually a struggle, for cities, for which either they have to, route it through the state for World Bank funding or some other funding, which typically takes time, right? But as far as possible, we try to encourage, cities to use the existing, funding ecosystem that is there, to finance their needs.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. Let me just head to Saswat to ask my last question probably for the session today. Saswat, you were stressing a lot on regional planning, and I recall even at CEPT, we have been teaching regional planning for quite some time, but at the same time, you also stressed on the importance of local area planning, which states like Gujarat are trying to do through their TP schemes. However, the TP schemes do not really address the way water bodies should be looked at, and I've been also breaking my head for nearly 30 years now on how lakes are mistreated even in the TP schemes. My question to you is related to a river which is a transboundary, let's say Sabarmati, and that's where Moksha's thesis also comes out very clear when she looks at the entire basin and tries to link the various aspects of river which are interconnected across the stretch of the river. Given that situation, if Sabarmati river basin, for example, would have had a regional planning per se, do you still think we would have gone with this 1400 crore rupees of riverfront development and not really address rest of the river? Because what we are doing today in India is something which was done in the West 30, 40 years ago. And we, instead of leapfrogging, we actually did the same mistake, also mentioned by Victor. And recently, I was also sitting in one of your public events where many, well-known speakers were there on with respect to river, where 25 river fronts were discussed that they are going to come up. Are we learning enough from Sabarmati riverfront and taking it further? And what is stopping us from doing regional planning? What kind of institutional tools are required? So over to you, Shashwat.
Yeah, thanks, Mansee. Very interesting question. See, first of all, since we don't have an integrated planning approach anywhere in the country, except for the planning school and our thesis books, the idea of integration is highly notional. It's like Victor mentioned about Melbourne. I was working in Germany, one planning, the Frankfurt Planning Agency in Germany. There is a law that by law, whenever you are making a plan, you have to laterally identify agencies that must be coordinated with, and also one agency below, and administratively one agency below, and administratively one agency above you. So if you are a Delhi you are preparing a Delhi master plan, so you have to identify the lateral agencies, then the agencies which are below at the local level or at the higher level of that. So the idea of integration is very difficult. So far, as a result, whatever the regional plans, there are some regional plans, like one larger is in NCPRB. There are also some attempts have been made in Matheran in Maharashtra, Aravali in Abu, Rajasthan, etc. But there have been some mixed results in terms of that. Only regional plans which have been working well are the industry-oriented regional plan, like special investment region, because there is the trigger by the industries in this. Coming back to the question that you raised about, the investing 500 kilometers versus, picking up 11 kilometers, etc. Because there is not much of study done at the outlook that what are the investment requirement for the 500 kilometer stretch. So what was done here, it is like, someone has taken up championing the cause, maybe from the beautification, maybe from the pollution control. Actually, the first origin of riverfront Ahmedabad came from Bernard Cohn, and it was mainly from the public access point of view. The second phase, it was mainly from the pollution control, because there was a national river conservation and Ahmedabad stretch was identified. So as a nationally as one of those most polluted stretches, and then whatever the form you get to see. So those kind of these pilots, stretches were identified, and I think there are similar efforts that are being done in Patna, etc., etc. But that at least brought the attention. Because of what happens here is whenever it's in the urban area, everyone from an administrator to a the judge of a court or a planner, that sensitization that we need to look at the river more. So I think in that way, there are really, I see is there are, the torch bearer, but while bearing the torch, maybe the point what Victor has been saying, and that we are probably repeating the same mistakes of what LA did in 60s or German cities did in 70s, which they are now deconcretizing, looking at river as a more nature oriented. So, the challenge here is that if one model gets little highlighted, that gets repeated. Everybody wants to copy and paste, and in other cities of that. So there is a major role. I think I'm sure the alliance what Victor and NIUA is leading probably will be able to sensitize the city leaders to. But frankly, there is a very interesting book called "Everybody Loves a Good Drought." It's a book in Maharashtra, in one Times of India, probably journalist who wrote. But we also have to, understand the political economy of big projects. Why would a project like that Victor was mentioning, now if you do in nature-based solution, your project cost will come so low. But if you do a kind of intercepting sewer or, do something, so everybody in our cities loves a good project. So, that when you say 60-40, the most of the mandate of a consultant or, city engineer is to make it bigger. So we are also not only the mindset, you're also working against a very large political economy of large projects. So you have to be, that's what I was saying, that when you are dealing with water, so we have to be more, that there are a lot of stakeholders, draw a force field diagram, who gains what, because the mistakes what we did in environmental planning, we positioned ourselves as a custodian of environment. But we have to position ourselves as one of the stakeholder trying to negotiate this maze about contradicting claims, and and that's what I think probably you have to see the river management in a completely new lens. If you want to safeguard our, I go into many workshops these days and I hear very passionate claim about, that we must do water, river is our mata, and so on and so forth. But we have to wear the hat and we have to talk to the same language where, I try to identify who has the what stake and try to negotiate, because this is a resource where, contradictory claims are coming. So whether it is your forest, whether it is your wetland, whether it is your urban water body. And I give this very interesting personal anecdote, what I saw in Maharashtra, that everybody was blaming the local real estate developers, saying that, you are destroying Pune, Pune's landscape, etc., etc. But if you Saturday, Sunday, if you read their newspaper, and there is a last 4 pages is all the real estate advertisement. And I was looking at carefully, almost every real estate guy is advertising the water view, lake view, green view, forest view, hill view. And not a single one which is advertising street view, bazaar view, or high-rise view. So these developers are actually trying to make money out of the landscape. Your water body, like for example, the investment made by the riverfront, they may not gain, but within the next block, you will see most of the apartment will either riverfront view, the restaurants will be the river by the bay, and etc., etc. Now they are trying to see, we have to bring them on the table. These are the powerful lobbies, and we have to negotiate. We have to be in that mode, trying to, instead of saying we are the custodian, because in that mode, by that time we will end up losing more and more urban lakes. As you know, what is happening in our, we are every day we are losing by means and many other means. So similarly in the river, we have to be much more clever, supported by evidence and science, but we need to train ourselves in political science. There are a lot of political economy of land and projects, and we need, that's what we have to deep dive, a lot of research supported by regulation. It's a long journey, but thanks for this kind of conversation actually opens up, brings people together, young researcher who can actually further deep dive in this. Thanks. And over to you.
Thank you so much, Saswat. And I think this conversation can keep on going forever, because it's one of the hot topics, not only in the country, but also close to our heart, all 4 of us who are here today leading the conversation. But I think a million or billion worth question for today will be how to bring the integrated water resource management philosophy into practice. And I don't see it happening on the ground unless and until we are really synced with the regional planning as well as the local area planning, where local stakeholders have their say, as rightly put by Saswat. To be honest,
one comment, Mansee, just sorry to interrupt.
Please.
I think this area, the land use instrument, I think some of you who are trained as an architecture, urban design planner, I think we need to have more and more, research, taking up also. Victor also running some thesis competition. I think
Yes.
we have to come together to, demystify. Sorry to
Yes.
interrupt, but I thought this.
No issues, no issues. Thank you. I was coming to very similar points here. As long as we continue doing land use planning and keeping the water aside that it is someone else's baby, unfortunately, water still is a state subject, where city planning is still an urban local body subject. And these two are, we don't have water department at a local level, by the way, it is still handled at the state level. And this is where we are talking about intersectoral, levels of actors, where they have to come together. Importantly, we as community of science and specialists or professionals, we can call, not custodians, as rightly pointed out, to correct ourselves, but demystifying lot of myths. But importantly, we understand that integrated water resource management is a philosophy which requires a lot of institutional teething to be brought to the ground, and it is actually the way out. And we have examples all around the world, and very well given example from Netherlands, from New Zealand, from Australia, and we can learn from what they have done, and also learn from the mistakes, and not literally again copy what 40 years ago others countries had done, and we are copying it today. Hopefully we don't wait for another 20 years to learn what these wonderful cities have done. I have been closely watching the Room for River projects and all, because some of my friends are involved in it. And recently I was also presenting the water grabbing case of riverfront developments in India, where I was really looking closely into the political economy and ecology of it. Unless and until rivers are clogged through fishes, birds, aquatic flora and fauna, I don't see any hope in any kind of integration, because even the integrated water resource management till date still talks about human appropriation of the resource. So unless and until river is conserved, I am scared of using the word development, to be honest. I don't like the word development. So unless and until the river is looked through the word of conservation, and conservation for aquatic biodiversity, I will stay pessimistic about the idea of integrated water resource management. I am trying to get hold of Professor Peter Molinga to give a talk to us, who actually coined the whole idea. So hopefully we get more clarification then. So before I close the session today, may I just announce the next Wednesday for water session is on July 5th. And we have a very nice lady who has walked through the ground, again having left her cushy job in the abroad, and we are doing our lake and pond series in the first week of Wednesday every month. And the title for next Wednesday is Braving Bit by Bit, and we are going to interact with Madhulika Chaudhary. She's very well-known woman in the field of lakes and ponds restoration in the country. And we will continue our Friday Waters and Monday Munching with Women for Water. And please stay tuned in our website for looking at more updates. And that is www.w4w.in. And last but not the least, may I thank all the participants who are, I see more people are on the YouTube today as well, which I was anticipating. So thanks to all the participants here, as well as in YouTube, who are listening to our conversation. We truly believe water conversations are crucial for water conservation. So thank you, Victor Shinde and Saswat, and as well as Moksha, for this wonderful conversation today. And may you remain inspiration for all of us, and we keep learning about more water matters in here. Thank you so much, all of you. Please take care.